thank you everybody for inviting me here, especially the State Archives. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be able to speak with everybody and to kind of share this knowledge. I was asked a while ago to become a National Heritage Responder in the United States because I do this all over the world, and they said, could you do it at home, please? And so this was even sort of a conversation that Catherine and I had, which then started this conversation around me doing this here today. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do a much longer workshop to do some hands-on training that maybe in the spring we'll do an all-day. So this is sort of a precursor and a teaser to that. And so just kind of bear that in mind, that this is where we're going. Emergency management and disaster preparedness. I like these slides because this doesn't happen just in South Louisiana. It happens all over the world. And as Catherine said, you know, we get baptized by water here a lot in South Louisiana. My first baptism comes during Hurricane Betsy. And those of you that maybe were around then, I'm old enough to say, I was one of those that with my mother was running across the street to the two-story house in New Orleans to get out of harm's way because my father is a meteorologist. He's retired now, but those that are from New Orleans and people even in the state that remember Nash Roberts, the famous Nash Roberts, my father was on his consulting staff. He is as I said, retired meteorologist, but also a petroleum engineer. So that information, I grew up with it intuitively. And the way we then prepared for disaster was everybody sheltered in place. And afterwards, including this time period during Hurricane Betsy, all the men took the barbecue pits into the middle of the road or in the middle of the street and took out everything out of their freezers that was thawing and cooked it. And every week or every day, it just what wasn't going to survive another day, they cooked and we kind of fed the street. That was emergency management as it was a long time ago. What happens now, of course, we're very familiar with this sign. This was on my house in New Orleans after Katrina. And we're aware of what this X means. Some people, though, that have joined us may not be aware of it if they're from other places. When emergency management comes in and they have to break the door down, they put this sign up that tells you whether or not there are people or bodies in the house, whether or not there's gas that's related or a hazard that's going on. The CA3 has to do with the team that goes in that marks the door, and then the 910 actually is the date that they went in, which if Hurricane Katrina was August 29th, this is September 10th when they broke the door down and entered my home. So I bring that because we all in South Louisiana know this drill. This is not something new. We grew up with this. We all feel like, oh, I know what to do, and we do it, but we can do it better. So I'm going to offer some things today on how can we do that better and how can we prepare better. Because even though we are in it and we know what to do, it's always good not to have that panic afterwards of, oh my God, I wish I had done XYZ. UNESCO defines the importance of documentary heritage, and for us in the archives, that's the crux of the matter for us today. It is documentary heritage and what happens to it when it gets wet, when it's burned, when it goes through a whole host of different types of damage. But in a fire, what does the fire department do? They spray water and everything. So you're still mitigating and dealing with water events. The importance, again, of documentary heritage is out there. But museums have documentary heritage. Libraries have primary sources. So it isn't just archives. It's libraries, museums, archives, historic sites, archaeological sites. We all deal with this type of documentary heritage that we need to protect. As Catherine said earlier, I do a lot of work on cultural heritage, and I do a lot of work with UNESCO teaching around the world when they say, oh, could you go here and do a workshop usually for 5 days, of having the different cultural heritage institutions come together to learn how to put together a disaster plan, how to mitigate against risks that are in their environments, etc. I love this picture because you will see on this side, on the left-hand side, is UNESCO's Memory of the World. This is actually my grandmother sitting with her and all of their siblings. Their brother is not in the picture. And then these are actually tomes from somewhere in Spain from the 15th, 16th century. So I often use this image to sort of show the breadth of the types of things that are out there, as well as just what documented heritage encompasses. We usually go into, there's two different, we're going to talk about the cycle of emergency management and disaster preparedness, but we get thrown into where do we start versus where we're forced to start. So where should we start? We should start with looking at our risks and then developing a plan. What oftentimes happens is we're thrown into a disaster. Why? Because we don't get the resources up front to mitigate, and then it costs us more afterwards because all of a sudden we're in a disaster. And it happens, you know, I always say, if a toilet's gonna leak, it's gonna leak above your desk. You know, I mean, that's just the Peter principle, that when this happens, if a pipe's gonna burst, it's gonna burst over your desk. And we're not prepared for those types of things. We do okay inside. We're so much better than where we were with Katrina, that we've learned so much, and we're able, with both our Homeland Security, with FEMA, we all have the app on our phone, or should have the app on our phone, that gives us direct messages as well as helps us prepare and gives us lists about what to have with us. So this is where should we start versus where we're forced to start. And I like this image because this was at a hotel in Puebla City in Mexico after the earthquakes. I was there to do some response and to give some advice on an archives and a library that had been damaged, that was built in the 16th century. And we can all understand what this sign means. So sismos is earthquake, the seismic activity. I don't really need to be able to read Spanish to kind of figure that out. But the little people, this is just a great piece of information. Conserve the calm, stay calm, you know, get away from buildings, run. Don't use the elevator, etc. So this was actually in the hotel we were staying in. Incendios, what is that? Fire, okay? So again, stay calm, you know, leave the building. Here's how to use the fire extinguisher. Anybody actually ever used a fire extinguisher before? Okay, that's on your list, Catherine, to get the fire department in here to teach people how to use a fire extinguisher. And they will do that. They will actually come and do a training to help on fire mitigation and teach you how to pull the pin and use it. Because if the first time you use it, it's in a fire, that's not very good. Where if you're already used to it, you're like, okay, I've done this before. I know what that is going to feel like when I fire that off. They'll even do like a mini fire in your parking lot and let people do it. So talk to you. It is. Get your fire department involved. And it's good because your fire department should not be the first time they come and visit with you, should not be during the disaster. You should know them. Invite them into your archives for milk and cookies or something stronger if that need be in the evening. But let them know how important your own collections are and to the cultural significance of your building, of your archives, of your museum. You don't want to meet those people for the first time and have them not know what's in your building. So it's a great way to have them come in. They'll come in and do a lunch and learn even, but learning how to use that fire extinguisher is really good. The other thing, we'll talk about this in a minute, but checking those fire extinguishers. I know they do it, but also you should do it. Make sure they're not out of date. So this is the life cycle of what we talk about in emergency management. I'm not going to go through all the definitions. I have them. We'll talk about them very briefly, but I'm more than happy to share this. This is available on the International Council on Archives website, which each of these definitions. But response, recovery, mitigation, and preparedness. What usually happens is we end up somewhere in here, and we don't start down here. We really should start down here in mitigation when there's nothing going on. But as we work through the circle, as soon as we're finished with recovery, we're looking at how can we do this better? What lessons did we learn? And what should we go back and correct, either in our plan or in our buildings, to build back better or to do better the next time? So mitigation, again, long definitions, but mitigation has to do with reducing risk. What can I do in the building to reduce risk? How can I walk around and look at a building and know, gee, if I'm in this building, where's the water lines? Where could there be a leakage? Are the windows sealed well enough? What's on the inside of the building that could be hazardous? What's on the outside of the building? Preparedness is that alarm. You know, we all know, you're gonna look at me and say, oh no, we are fortunate here because of hurricanes, because we get a warning. People that don't get a warning, either between earthquakes, tornadoes, they get, you know, my son one time lived in Oklahoma and he said 3 minutes is different than 3 days. And he said, I hated living in Oklahoma because the tornado sirens meant less than 3 minutes. We're here with 3 days. We get 3 days of warning when something is in the Gulf and something looks like it may move our way. The destruction afterwards is not fortunate, but certainly the prep time gives us time to prepare better. Response is that initial time period in the beginning. We all go in. This is when news media is all over us. The focus is there. Think about Ida. We had focus for all of about 3 days, and then it's been a year, or it's been longer than a year, and the focus has shifted. We now have Hurricane Ian that has hit Florida, which overshadowed what happened in Puerto Rico also this summer. So it's a forever cycle that we get moved down the ladder. We're still dealing with what happened not only with Ida, but the year before that with Zeta and Eta and whatever the other end of the Greek alphabet was. That happened in our western part of our state. And they're still waiting to get back to normal. So that response continues. Recovery is getting back to full-scale normal. So response, a lot of times within our institutions, recovery means you're back to serving the way you were before or better. So you're open to patrons, you're open to staff, you're able to, it's not that emergency situation of trying to get the water out of your building, get your materials dried, get things back repaired, and then opening back up to the public. Recovery is that full cycle around, but you're not finished there, because we all know as we rebuilt after Katrina, we rebuilt stronger, especially in New Orleans with better, in some ways, better infrastructure. But we are still having to go back to make sure the pumps are running, this is running, that's running, and that we have the services. We all know the challenges in cell phones. My goodness, we used to, during Hurricane Katrina, we couldn't get a text message out. Now, after Hurricane Ida, even in New Orleans, you had the towers went down and you could not get information in or out for about 24 hours. And that's a really scary proposition of not even being able to check on your parents or your children without getting in a car and driving around trees that are down to find out whether or not your children are safe or your parents are safe. So we still have those challenges when we're in the middle of responding and then trying to recover. Usually at this point in time we do an exercise, and I'm going to skip sort of right through this, but I will show you this slide, and if we come and do a full day you'll do this exercise. But this is usually a group assessment because I like throwing, when I do a workshop, I like to throw you in the deep end to begin with and then teach you how better to respond the next time. So your last activity, it's like, oh wait, now I know what to do. So this is the getting thrown into the deep end. If this is where you're starting and you don't have a plan, this is not good. And walking through just looking at this, are you on a first, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You can just yell answers. Are you on the first floor? No. So you know you're in a high rise. Are the windows intact? Is the ceiling intact? Do we know who the people are that are pilfering in the desks? No. So they could be, do we know that if this is even an office that we want to spend time in, or is it the office next door to this? Do we know if there are records in this building that need, in this office that need to be saved? Have we checked with security to know if it's okay to come in? Do we know if the electricity is off or the wires on the floor are live? All of those questions we have to be able to answer and ask ourselves as we're going through a disaster scenario. Again, a much longer time period of looking at what supplies do we need. I want a garbage bag first to pick up everything. You know, I want sweepers. Do we have that? You know, we think our maintenance department should have it because we don't necessarily have all kinds of brooms in our closets, in our offices, but maintenance should have it. Do we check with maintenance to know what supplies they have as well as what supplies we have within our archives to deal with wet records? This is a much bigger scenario. When I did the National Heritage Responders, we did very large facilities, actually at a UCLA library, that the case scenario was it's been hit by an earthquake and you have a half an hour to go in and assess the damage with a hard hat. And we went through those scenarios. So practicing that panic time period will help you better respond in the future. So today, I have 3 action items. So I'm a very hard proponent, I guess, advocate for what are 3 things that you can do. I don't like to give people so much information in a workshop, or I challenge people after a workshop with 3 days of information to go, okay, what are the 3 things you can do now? What are the 3 things you're going to accomplish within 6 months? And what are the 3 things that you know are going to be long term? And that then helps you focus. Because if I overwhelm you with everything you need to be able to do, you're going to do nothing. So I want you to be able to at least take away 3 things that you can go back and do. Some of them very quickly, some of them taking a little bit more time with staff to do. One of them is monitoring the space. These are the 3 things we're going to look at today. Monitoring the space, decreasing the risk to the collection, and prioritizing the collections. So how do we monitor the space? We've all learned in graduate school and throughout courses, temperature and humidity has to be a set. It has to be this. Well, if you've ever worked in the Caribbean or you've ever worked in Africa or someplace else, it's not that. Our paper didn't even know what air conditioning was 75 years ago. And yet we have documents that are 300 years old because documents are living and they're made of living material, cotton or wood pulp, if a little bit later, and they're used to breathing. Yet we all of a sudden say, okay, you have to live in this environment that's perfect. Well, when a hurricane comes through and you're without electricity for 2 weeks, it's not perfect. And we freak out that they're not in a perfect environment anymore. But they have been through this for 300 years. And if you ever look at a rubber band, if you stretch it, it'll go back. And paper will do that until it stretches too much, which is what happens with water. It stretches too much, and when it breaks, you get that wave, okay? Which is what's happening then as it dries out. You think about paper afterwards when it gets because it's stretched too much. Same thing happens on the opposite side when you go up north with the brittleness because of the cold. They're not getting enough humidity. So how do we monitor the space and feel comfortable with what we need to do? There is a place on the internet, a website that's called DPCalc, dewpointcalculator.org. If you've not seen this before, go out and play with it. What you can do here, and what you should do, is this. You can change this. It doesn't work well on a cell phone, so you have to actually have a computer. But you can put the temperature, you can put the relative humidity. So right now you could go outside. It's going to be great today. But if I could move this and move this lower, you're going to see all of these pieces over here go to no risk. But if you here, 87 degrees with 73% humidity gives you a dew point of 78%. And that's how they'll calculate the risk. These terms over here are natural aging. You have 7 days before that begins to take place. Now it has to stay at this constant temperature for that to be important, for this actually to happen. Mechanical risk is about 13 days. Mold risk is 60 days. If you've ever lost an HVAC system in your vault and you're, oh my God, everything's going to start molding, and you're able to take these calculations either with a handheld hygrometer or if you have a gauge that's on your wall, you can look at this, go plug it in, and know how many days you have at this temperature and humidity before that risk takes place. When I worked in New Orleans, we had an HVAC system go out. I had a facilities manager that understood, that had been to a course with me about monitoring space, and he said, how many days do we have? He knew this calculation. And by being able to do that, I said, we have 3 weeks. We have 21 days. And he said, it will be repaired before then. So it was a great way to then show how much time do we have to be able to mitigate this and to get this repaired. When that moves up, as we know in South Louisiana, sometimes you get 3 days. And then the last one is actually metal corrosion. Metal corrosion here, another 13 days. So this is a really good way to monitor space. Risk assessment. So that was number one, learn how to monitor your space. Risk assessment has to do with going out and, again, as I said before, identifying and assessing and prioritizing what the risks are. And we want to be able to lessen what those risks are. So we're taking what are the highest risks, and we're then looking at what are medium, what are low risk. We are low risk for freezing and having below, not that we don't, because we did last night, and I think we're going to do it again tonight, but it's not like long-term, that type of frigid, dry, cold weather. So in risk assessment, we want to identify those hazards. And I always have some of the stories, we were looking at a building in the Caribbean, and I said, what is the building next door, as we looked on the outside? And they said, that's the rum house. And the ooze that was coming out was the bagasse and the end of the rum product, sort of like in the cane fields when we have the bagasse. And I smelled it. I kept thinking, what does that smell? It smells like cane fields. And I said, well, then this is not, that's probably flammable, and it's not the best place to put your archives, is next to it. The rum was good. We did get to taste it. But they offered us free samples as we were assessing the area. But you want to identify your hazards. You want to assess the risk, you want to implement those appropriate measures, and you want to then monitor and reassess those risks. This is a toolkit. It's called Parbica Toolkit. It is actually the Pacific region of the International Council on Archives. There are 30, I think, guidelines on setting up archives, but the ones that are most important for us are the good governance, the developing a disaster plan, which is guideline number 20. So if you can go out and look at this, it will step by step help you with a building assessment, with walking around. There's nothing better in a community, if you're in a small community or even a large one, we've done this in New Orleans, is having people visit each other's institutions and to walk around, so because another pair of eyes will go, wait, what is that up there? And because they may see a leak, and they may say, I see a water damage. You go, oh, I didn't even notice that. Because we're so used to our facilities, we don't have the same eyes that someone visiting comes in and helps us with. So I'm going to quickly go through the next couple of slides because all of these hazards in South Louisiana, we have them all. It's just a long list of everything that can happen. So these are the types of hazards: natural, industrial, environmental, human, and technological. Natural. We don't really have earthquakes unless LSU's doing really well and we score a great touchdown and, you know, the seismograph goes off. We certainly have hurricanes, flooding, coastal flooding, high winds, tornadoes, the occasional ice storm in North Louisiana, drought, we're having some of that now, dam failures, we might as well just put levee failures there, etc. So we have all of these natural disasters, with the exception of probably a true earthquake of flattening buildings. Human hazards, we all have this across the board. Doesn't matter where we are, these are always going to be a threat to our environments. Arson, vandalism, bombs and active shooters, theft and accident, and of course nowadays our pandemic, because we had to work away from our offices and weren't able to monitor our offices and our space as well as we should have.
Did you have a pandemic on there before COVID?
I actually did, just because of Ebola and some of the other things when I was teaching before. Good question now. Technology. We all have this. We all know what this is about, and this is becoming more and more because our platforms are either in the cloud or on our own in situ to be able to have our space and our digital documents. But we have to make sure that they are safe, all of our digital assets, to hacking and cyber terrorism. I'm working right now with Ukraine and the Ukrainian archivist who there is, you know, I think about us and hurricanes, and it is nothing like our Ukrainian colleagues who have been on the line with us as they prepare for winter. And we've done small workshops for them, and sometimes they say, I have to leave right now, the sirens are going off and we have to go underground. So there is nothing that we do or that we have to prepare for like they have to prepare for. I can say that the international community has responded and helped them store, I think the last was, 125 terabytes of digital storage that is in the cloud being kept safe by another country. It's not us, but another country, which is just extraordinary for the international community to be able to do that. But we have to know how to be able to protect ourselves with that. So on risk assessment, there are a couple of things that we need to do. We need to not just look at the immediate and local threats, but we need to take a broader view. We need to not limit ourselves to that immediate environment. We know here in Baton Rouge, you have Exxon. You may think that's far enough away, but it certainly, if something really critical happened there, the overflow into this space or even into all of Baton Rouge would be astronomical. We have to identify and assess the potential risks to the collections, what's going to happen. How do we, in the Caribbean, when a volcano erupts, they have to worry about shutting off the HVAC so that the ash doesn't get into the building. So again, how would you shut that off if hazard because a plant exploded somewhere? How would you shut all that off here? There are available worksheets for doing a risk assessment and for developing a plan. FAIC is deals with cultural heritage. It's a national organization, and that's actually where the National Heritage Responders come from. So when we identify our risk, again, we're looking at geography, whether we're in an urban or rural setting, who shares your building. Just here, you have the archives, but you have other state officials that share this building, or this complex with you. So who are those people? Is it somebody else that you have to worry about what's there? Who are your neighbors? Now around here, your neighbors happen to be a nursing home and an apartment complex. But in other areas, if you are Southern University, you're closer to Exxon that you may consider your neighbor. Or if you're down on the Mississippi River and you're part of the African American Museum, you've got all the plants that are down there. So you've got different types of risk. And again, you want to look at what is that radius. What is your infrastructure? This is a very strongly built building, but other people that are in more of a house archives have a structure that they have to be very aware of. And then what's the crime rate? In Mexico, they took the old prison and made it the archives. Well, it's not in the best of the neighborhoods where a prison would be, but it is very safe because it's very guarded. But you have to look at what's your space and where you're getting, what's in your proximity. So when you look at your institution, we want to know, where is it now? How well are you doing now? What, if you're going to write a report, what do you want to write? And there are sheets, again, in that Parbica toolkit that will allow you to look at your building and go around and answer some questions for yourself. Who are you going to send it to? There are a lot of people, there's just nobody to send it to. It's me. I'm making a report for me. What changes and strategies do you want to put into place? What changes can you put into place now? So you can go out and check all of those fire extinguishers. You can learn about fire extinguishers. And what concerns do you have in the next year or the coming year? We are now in a sweet spot. We're in October. We probably aren't going to get another hurricane this late in the year, or if we do, it will be small, hopefully. And we have until June. So we have almost a 9-month window to document and make changes if that's where we need to be. So you're going to look at the outside of your building. I talked about this. These are some common areas that you want to look at. Certainly drainage is one of them. We all have gutters and downspouts. We're all very used to, in South Louisiana, having to clean our own gutters and downspouts at our homes. We need to make sure maintenance is doing the same thing in our buildings. Windows and skylights. Isn't it lovely that you have a skylight in your archives? Not a good thing. Again, I've been in a facility, the library. The architect thought it'd be a really good thing for university archives because it'd be nice and calming to put a fountain in the middle of the archives in their atrium area. It's like, no, who thought of this? In the 1970s, just thought that was a great idea. Trees and landscaping, we are all very familiar with oak trees and how they fall, as well as cypress trees that aren't as vulnerable to falling down, but certainly oak trees. And then what are the water and fire hazards? When we're inside the building, we need to look at the ceiling, the walls, again, the windows and the skylights, the electrical systems, the pipes, where are the joins? Again, don't have your piping system running over your archives, but a lot of times we inherit that space. A lot of times we inherit the basement when we don't have basements in South Louisiana, but that's where they're going to put the archives. And then heating and ventilation. I touched on fire suppression and fire detection as far as knowing how to work with your fire extinguisher, but you also want to know what kind of system you have, and you want to be able to document that. You want to be able to know that when your fire department comes in, that you can tell them that. We have halon, we have a fire suppression system that isn't like that is a sprinkler system in certain areas, because that's the way we protect our archives. What are the stack areas? Are you using the bottom shelf in a flood-prone area? What construction projects are going on, and are they going to be complete? I'm working with an organization right now that their contractors are making sure that they have all of the pre-cut plywood to go on that, to be able to mount during a hurricane season. So they're prepping that ahead of time. And then what construction projects are going on around you. We all know that we're great for tearing up streets and tearing up I-10. Well, how does that change water and water flow? And then what other internal objects or internal hazards may be going around. But even the construction projects, besides what I mentioned outside, what is going on inside? Okay, number 3. We're going to look at collection. So now we've done monitoring space, and we've looked at the inside and outside of our buildings and looked to see what changes we can make. Now, some changes we can make easily, and some changes we're never going to be able to change, because you're going to go up to your upper management and go, oh, I need $100,000. So you have to figure out what then is the low-hanging fruit of things that I can change, and how can I protect it. So in collection assessment, we're going to do the same thing. How many in here are part of the conservation of the conservators? You don't anymore. You used to have some conservation. Okay, get your million out of that. So those conservators are used to one document that has a tear that they're going to spend a lot of time fixing and mending and gluing or not gluing, or whatever they're going to do for that type of treatment, because it is an early document that is from 1808 that talks about the beginning of the code for Louisiana. All right, that's meticulous work. In collection assessment and in emergency management, it's triage. It is a totally different mindset, because you're now not trying to save one document, you're trying to save as many as possible. And just like if you're in the medical field and you're doing triage, you can't save everybody, and you have to save those that you can save. Okay? So collection assessment is critical. Knowing and setting priorities for salvage. What is the most important? If you can do an exercise with your team and say, if I had an 18-wheeler, what would I take out? Hopefully almost everything. Unless you're the state archives, you probably wouldn't fit in an 18-wheeler. If I had a moving van, a small one of those little U-Haul, what could I fit? If I have a van, a mom's minivan, what will fit? If I can only take 10 boxes out, what am I going to take? If I can only take one box, what am I taking? And if I can only take one document, what am I taking? Those are hard, and what you think may not be what your teammate thinks. But honing that down to knowing what's the most important is how you will set your collection priorities to know this is what we have to grab. In the Archdiocese of New Orleans and Ida, they lost 36 windows in the building that the archives is in. And I was in on part of that salvage, helping them as they decided what to bring out. And there is a drawing of the landing of the Ursulines from 1727. That's an original charcoal that is, it just depicts what was happening. It is it's an invaluable, beautiful object from 1727. To me, that was the one that had to come out, and it came out of New Orleans and came to Baton Rouge to be in a safe environment while everything else started the response and the recovery. But knowing what that one thing is and knowing where it is important. So how do we do that? You can use red, orange, and yellow fluorescent dots or stickies or tape to put your collection so that you know this is what we're going to grab. If you've already got it digitized, as much as there's so much we don't want to lose, but if you've got it digitized, it's the information that's critical. I mean, think about the Bible. Sure, you'd love the very first one if it exists, but we have so many copies and you can find it everywhere else. Is that really what you want to save? It's the information that already exists someplace else. So you're going to design. You also have to know where your temporary storage is. Where is it going? If something happened to this building, where's it going? Where's the material going to go? And do you have a plan for where it's being evacuated to? Because if you don't, you can't evacuate. You have to actually mitigate in place. And then arranging for secure or moving the holdings. Do you have a company that you're already working with or under contract with that will help you move and salvage that material? So in your collection plans, there's a mapping that you can do. So you're going to identify the collections. You know where everything is. You already have finding aids. You already have shelf lists. Are they in such a way that you can get to them after a disaster happens? If there's no electricity in this building, is it stored in some sort of a way that without electricity and with flashlights and with a floor map that you could get to it? Can you get to it, or can someone on your staff get to it? And having those exercises is important. Having those floor plans, knowing where critical information is, where those locations are, and what are the backups. Now it's more cloud storage or off-site storage in both digital and records, paper records. So implementing those appropriate measures, mitigating the identified risks. This is back to some of the risk stuff, but it's also important for your collections. Starting with activities that will be most effective to those related to your most likely risks. So again, some you can eliminate, some you can lessen the potential, some you'll never be able to address until somebody gives you $1 million and gets you out of the basement. Develop a list of tasks to be accomplished. This is with that part of that team. Who is going to do what? When we come back and do a bigger, longer day, there's actually what they call incident command. So who's taking charge of being the leader? Who's taking charge of communicating with the news media? Who's taking charge of communicating with staff? Who's in charge of the collection? Who's in charge of the facilities? And how is the team working together to know who's doing what? It may not be the director that's the head of incident command. It might be the collection manager, because there's other collection people that can deal with the collection. And they're more knowledgeable about the collection itself. So develop the list of tasks to be accomplished now, and then make sure that you install or improve your alarm system that goes along with your collection management. When you're writing a plan, if you're a party of 1 or 2 in your organization, you can jot some things down that are bullet points so you have it, so that when you're in a panic, you have it at your fingertips. But having a plan that's going to be 40 pages long when it's just you, and you may have tips and tricks in it, yes. But if there's nobody else to share it with, that's what the archives may need, is something that's 40 or 50 pages long. But a one-person shop, it needs to be very simple and very easy and very clear so that you know what you're doing. So again, make it easy to revise. There's nobody that wants big language and, big words, and it has to be something that you've gone over. And then, of course, there's numerous templates available. D-Plan is just one of them. So you need it to be well organized, relevant, and practical. So we don't need to put earthquakes and what we're going to do during an earthquake. Tailored to, again, your geography, your users, and your priorities. Based on broad-based staff involvement. So it doesn't do you any good to be the leader and to write it and then not have input from staff because they may see things a different way. And you need to practice with staff on this. Widely distributed and read. So everybody's got to be on the same page. And then review it at least annually. Now's a really good time to look at what do you have in place, what are you going to change by February, what in May are you going to make sure everybody's read and everybody's on the same page, and by May everybody's had a full day training to move forward in what to do when disaster strikes. And then you want to be able to test it. So this is what I do a lot of, is mapping out a disaster scenario. One of my favorite ones that they do at the National Heritage Responders, or at least this is one of the scenarios, and I refuse to participate in this one. So when we talk about critters, I've been in places with bats where they were hanging from the ceiling above collections, owls that had owl droppings everywhere, rats, you name it, they had been in there. But one of the disaster scenarios is to actually, you have to tag somebody out because they've either gotten hurt, so you got a disaster within a disaster. And on this one, in one of the boxes, in one of the baskets, they put a rubber snake. So the person that finds that gets bit. And you now have that as part of the scenario. I hate snakes. So I always tell them, let's find another way to tag people out, but it won't be the snake method. But in South Louisiana, we do have snakes. And when the water rises, there can be snakes in our collections. In Africa, there are snakes in collections because if you have rats, the snakes aren't far behind. If your collection is somewhere or your archives is somewhere out near cane fields, you're going to have critters. So, and you could very easily have a snake round the corner and there's a snake in your collection. So you want to be able to map out those disaster scenarios, run through them. What happens if a disaster happens and nobody's here? It's at a time when the facility is closed. What happens then? How is that different from when everybody's here on site? Who are your service providers and being able to call them? What happens if you have to close the reading room and limit the service? What does that plan look like? What is the response times and the standards? How are you going to amend that plan? And then testing and cleaning those drawing procedures. Again, a tabletop exercise, everybody being outside, everybody seeing what happens when everything gets wet, and then practicing with that information. So lastly, these are just a few things and suggestions of different types of forms you'll want to have. These are easy forms. I'm going to show you the last three, so you just sort of get an idea. Forms should not be onerous. We all know I'm not talking about grant forms or grant packages that take months to fill out. We need it easy and simple because you're trying to manage. And during Hurricane Katrina, I took copious notes as well as lots of pictures. So if in the evening I could go back, even on the temperature and humidity control, I would take a picture of it so that I could go back and document what it was in the facility that I was visiting. So who is your disaster response team? Telephone tree, volunteer list, because your volunteers are going to show up and say, how can I help? And you're going to, I don't know if I want you here. You want to make sure that sorry if there's any volunteers in the room. You do want to make sure that they are trained. Okay? There are ways to train volunteers to understand that they are trusted volunteers to come in and deal with your material. Because you don't want somebody from the outside coming in and saying, hey, I want to be here, because they may end up putting something in their pocket. And then the action plan to reduce or remove the risk, the collection salvage priorities, and then the crate document form. Easy forms. This is an action plan to reduce it. What is the risk? What is the action? What resources do you need? Who's going to do it? And when is it due? 5 things, very easy. I'm going to go back to those fire extinguishers. The risk is they're out of date. What's the action? Somebody's got to go around and check them all. Who's going to do it? The resources? No, you don't need anything, you need your feet. Who's assigned it to? We're assigning that to Melanie. When's it due by? She's got to do it by November 1st. She's got to go around the building, look at all of them, know where they are, and document to make sure that there are none of them that are out of date. This is a collection salvage. Very easy. This is a priority list. So what's the priority level? You can do this even by collection, top of the collection, okay? You don't have to do it by box. This is this collection. These are the legislative papers. These are the early ones. These are, property records. These are vital records. Which ones and how are you putting that priority? What's the priority level? Where are they? Call collection or a session collection. What's the location? You can even map this on your floor plan. What is it? Is it paper? Is it photographs? Is it artwork? What is it? What's the size and what's the notes? Back to photographs or artwork. Artwork, there's some artwork you can't move. So you got to figure out how you're mitigating it in place, because it's either mounted to the wall or it's too big to move. That's another whole piece of the puzzle for later on. Again, this one is another type of one of those collections objects, but this is the object, this is the number, what's the damage? So this is a damage assessment form. So this is a quick, have it on a clipboard that you're walking around going, that's damage, we've got to mitigate against that. What is it? What's the category of the salvage? It's wet. And if you're working with a disaster company, they're going to want to know if it's damp, if it's moist, if it's damp, or if it's wet. So that means feels a little wet, kind of damp, dripping. Okay, so you've got, and they will decide then where it's going within their system as to whether or not it needs to go into a chamber or whether it can air dry. What's the treatment? We all need to know how to air dry, because if we can't get something out, we need to know how we're going to manage those critical documents and the most important collections if we have to do it on site. Again, what's the location? If you're moving something, you got to document how you're moving it, and then any notes. So I have my final conclusions. Prepare for and respond to disaster is never easy and quick. We all know this as South Louisiana people and anybody across Louisiana, really, because we know what hurricanes can do, but we also know about levee breaks, pipe breaks, etc. Risk assessment, mitigation, disaster preparedness, and response planning, that response and recovery significantly increases the chance of recovery. So planning beforehand so that you are not in a panic, you'll know what to do. Everything we learned in graduate school, if we learned any of this, the theory, you have to have the theory, but it's afterwards that you have to be creative, because you have to know what you're starting with, and you have to be able to then turn around and maybe do something, pivot and do something a little different. Again, during Katrina, had a colleague that looked at me and said, we got a bag from FEMA of wet records that had been wet for 5 months. They didn't have mold, but they stunk. And we had to do something with them. We had to rinse them. And I remember my colleagues saying, we tried cold water, they had a little bit of oil on them, we couldn't get it off. So I said, it was regular water, tepid water. I said, try going a little warmer. And she says, the book says not to use hot water. We might damage it. I said, it can't get any worse than it already is. Let's try with 1 and then see what happens. And sure enough, a little bit warmer water was able to get rid of that oil. Which in that instance, it just worked. So it's being able to creatively think out of the box, but you have to be able to plan ahead of time to be able to do that. Working with your first responders, I talked about that earlier, knowing your fire people, knowing your FEMA people, knowing your Homeland Security people, it's crucial ahead of time. If they have wherever you are, whether it's in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, or somewhere else, if there are Homeland Security meetings, go. New Orleans actually has a cultural heritage that's within the Homeland Security to have us there if need be and to be able to discuss these things. All of this is going to save you headaches, time, effort, and above all, your collections. So here's the final thoughts. Be vigilant, be patient, be prepared for surprises. Take specific recovery workshops now. This is the first of many, I hope. Know your collection. Know your maintenance staff and your IT personnel. Invite them in and give them a tour of the importance of your facility, and then serve them cookies and coffee. There's nothing better than bringing maintenance staff donuts in the morning and then saying, hey, you want to come see what we're doing? Take nothing for granted and be safe. These are some of the resources that I spoke about today. There's the Parbica Toolkit. There's the UNESCO Safeguarding Memory of the World. There's a forthcoming book that, and actually it's a workshop the full online training. It's actually going to be 2023 now, but a colleague and I are writing the ICA Emergency Management Disaster Preparedness Workbook. We're on our sort of 3rd revision at the moment. So we use it during training, but we're developing a full training course on it. And then all of these are the different international organizations. Blue Shield protects cultural heritage in times of conflict. ICA, which is archives. IFLA, which is libraries. These are all the international. International on museums is ICOM. ICOMOS is monuments and sites. And ICROM, oh God. Sorry, ICROM. Okay, that's going to also be more sites and management. And this is me. I now work as an adjunct professor at LSU, and I also have my own consulting business so that I'm available if anybody wants me to come in and do longer workshops, but I'm also available just if you want to call and say, hey, can you come talk to our group, or can you do a workshop in an area in Louisiana? So I think that's it for me.